Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to RCT Creations for another RCT Construction episode. Today, we are at Funland here in Sacramento, California during January of 2007, so we're getting kicked off pretty early here. We're going to head back into the Minetown section, and as I mentioned in my war video for Joyland, it was part of a 2-ride package, so we are going to get kicked off building our second GCI wooden roller coaster here at Funland. And as much the same case as it was with the Joyland version, I do have the build already complete. I don't have the stats in front of me though, so we'll get there when we get there, I guess. But let's go ahead and get kicked off with our wooden roller coaster here. So we want to be at 10 feet off the ground. And I have my station area marked out here, and I'm surprised it didn't kick on. It marks on ride tracks automatically. There we go. So again, just like the wooden coaster at Joyland, we're going to start with the fresh light brown wood color just because it's brand new and the wood will tend to weather itself in. And then I'm going to go with the plain, whoops, not jungle, the plain entrance style just like that. So we'll start with the back side here, angle it off this way. And then we'll start with our transfer track. So the thing about this ride that's a little bit different than the one from Joyland. So Joyland's GCI was much higher off the ground for the most part. This one, not the case. This one's pretty close to the ground. It's going to require quite a bit of terraforming to get it to fit where we want it. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there is our... not block brakes, just regular brakes. There's our transfer track, and as you can see, we've already run up against the wall here. And this is going to be a theme for this coaster. It's going to take quite a bit of land modification to get it where we want it here. So we'll start there. We do not want any tunnels, but we'll go ahead and start getting the land all flattened out here. And then we'll make it look nice later for the most part. So let me get my final brake run put in here. The brake run on this one's going to be diagonal. So we'll give it a little bit of speed. So we'll set the block brake to 9, set that last brake there to 9, and then I want 3 more pieces right here. So here's what we'll give a little bit more speed. Into the brakes, 1 plane. And then an angle off that way. So that is where our layout that's where our final brake run kicks off. Right there. So we'll come back through and we'll make this land all look nice later. But for the most part, that is the end of our ride. And actually, I'll build the final bunny hop as well real quick. So that is where our coaster ends, right there. So unlike the wooden coaster at Joyland, they're both going to be themed, have the exact same theme for the most part. There might be a couple tweaks I'll make to it, but it's going to be called War, much like the one at Joyland, and I've said Joyland a lot so far in this video. So I apologize if you hear that a lot. But this wooden coaster will also be called War. We'll get kicked off with our run into the lift here, and then again this coaster is gonna require a lot of terraforming to make it fit into the landscape we've got. And I think there's stuff you can do with that to make it look kind of nice as well. So I think, just to kind of give you a hint of what I'm thinking here, we'll take this and carve it out a little bit, and then what we'll do is we'll carve that out, and then we'll have it kind of like just shelve itself up for the lift hill to fit in. Make it look nice like that, and then we'll color the terrain to match that a little bit. Just so it feels kind of slotted into the spot it's in. And the same thing here, we'll kind of clear up some of this just to give the track a little bit of breathing room, which is what I want to do. When I build my coasters, I like to give the track some breathing room on either side, just so you have space where maybe maintenance needs to come in and do something, they have room to do it. So our lift hill is going to go up to, I believe, 100 feet. Yep, 100 feet. However, the ride itself will not be 100 feet tall because the land is not that tall. So if you look at the height on the land right here, I mean, we're at 25 compared to the 100. So I mean, the highest point right now is 80 feet, but I believe this is the tallest point. I don't know 100% if that's the case. I'll have to do some maths the further in we go. So again, just like the one at Joyland, we're starting with the unbanked turn into the banked turn. And I'm going to clear out some of the vegetation around it because I don't want that to affect the lift hill. And the start for this one's going to be very similar. So we drop down into our bank turn and then we curve out. However, the one at Joyland does one of these numbers. So it goes back this way. The war at Funland is going to continue heading out this direction. And rather than go down, we're going to jump back up. So rather than going down like that, we're going to jump up into the air and go to a height of 60 feet. And then we're going to bank out. So I'm kind of taking some Prowler / Mystic Timbers inspiration on this one. We're going to make it an out and back. Really Prowler, and that's one of my favorite wooden coasters. If I had to say my favorite GCI, it's either Mystic Timbers or Prowler, so that's where this one's taking inspiration from. The war at Joyland took inspiration from Evel Knievel, and I can't, or not Evel Knievel anymore. It's now called American Thunder, and I can't remember. I think it's Thunderbird at Power Park is the original one, because Evel Knievel, American Thunder, was a clone of Thunderbird at Power Park. And it's a very, very good layout as well, so no complaints from me there. So yeah, the war at Joyland takes inspiration from Renegade or Thunderbird, and this one is going to take more inspiration from a Prowler or a Mystic Timbers. So we're diving back down, and we're going to go into this excellent little airtime hill here. So we're just going to do one of those. So we're diving down. Here's where we're picking up most of our speed. And then our maximum speed, I believe, is going to be reached right about here. So we're diving down into this turn. I want to carve out really just enough land because I want the land to kind of conform to this coaster. Whether that means we put like stints on the side so it looks like the land was modified to fit it, which I kind of want. I want this ride to look like the land around it was made to fit this coaster. So we've got our high speed turn here, and now we're going to go back up. And originally, our turnaround was going to be right here. The original length of this ride was only about 3,600 feet. However, I decided, you know what? That's not quite enough, so I ended up lengthening it. So originally, this was your turnaround right here. We dropped back down and started to head back. However, to add a little bit of extra length, I ended up just making this another high-speed turn. And then we're going to drop down to our 15-foot mark. And now we're going to angle back up. And then with this land right here, just to kind of make it fit the coaster better, we're going to raise that up just so it's flat. So when you're doing your construction, you don't have to dig into the ground there. And then we'll level out. At our 40-foot mark, we're going to go into an unbanked turn here. And what we're going to do is give a little bit of an airtime hill just to create a little bit more space for this track to pass underneath. So we're not going to have a whole lot of speed here. But now we're going to start working our way back. So our highest point is kind of the turnaround back here. So we're going to lose a little bit of speed. But look at how far out we are from our station. This is going to be an excellent coaster here. And one of my favorite things here is the lift hill height for War is only 100 feet, whereas the Sidewinder for Iron Horse is 105. So that kind of makes me laugh a little bit. All right. So now we're going to dive back down this way, and we're going to dip underneath our path out. Make sure I have my track correct. Down to 5 feet, and then down to that 0. And I believe 0 is the lowest point on this ride. And then we're going to put our on-ride photo section right here, just to kind of give us a little bit of extra revenue that we can build. And then we're going to go up, bank our turn a little bit before we head up, just to make it feel a little smoother. And I think I've said it before, but I like to bank the curve before heading into there just because, again, I think it feels smoother as opposed to that, which looks like it'd be really, really jarring. So we're going to do that. On some of the older arrows, I might do that kind of jarring transition because the arrow coasters tend to have those jarring transitions. But on a GCI wooden coaster, most of the transitions are going to be pretty smooth. Okay, so now we're going to start heading up this hill here to 35 feet. And this is another spot where I might redo the terrain underneath just to make it look like there's maybe concrete footers or something that are building up. Not necessarily horribly complex concrete footers, but just using the land to terraform around it. And we'll get to that in the fitting out process. So another unbanked turn for a little bit of lateral. Now we're going to dive back down and start heading back towards the rest of the structure. And we're going to do a little... Oh, I thought there was an airtime hill here. Never mind. There was no airtime hill, so we're just going to drop right back down to the 10-foot mark. Right there. And then angle out into an S-bend. So now we're going to head back underneath kind of our first drop, just like so. And we're going to do another kind of S-bend. So we're getting really GCI right here. And I love GCI wooden coasters because of how twisty they are. So we're going to angle out, another unbanked turn, and we have a little bit of play right here. It's going to take a little bit of land terraforming to get this to fit. Right here, see-through vegetation. I do not want to modify all the land quite yet. So we're going to go into a wider turn right here. And now we're going to start heading back towards our final break run. And we are going to head up to 10 feet, bank this direction. And now we are about lined up with our final break run, but we have a little bit of space here. And remember, we had that little dip. So we're going to do a little bit of a sideways downward bank heading into our final breaks. So giving a little bit more lateral before we pop up to that little tiny airtime hill and slam into that final break run right there. But there is your layout. And I really have a hard time figuring out which layout I like better between the two. I'm leaning towards this one, but that's also because this one's the more recently completed. But I really, really like this layout as well, and I'm excited to have another GCI. But I think with the layout being complete, we can go ahead and head over into the fitting out process. All right, and kicking off this fitting out process, this one took a long time to get done just because, like I mentioned in the live, there was just a lot of stuff to do with it because it is a lot more of a terrain coaster than its counterpart at Joyland War East. We're digging out a little bit of a trench around the final break run here just so it's not, actually in a trench. We kind of want to make it look a little bit nicer than that. And I think the final product ended up looking pretty darn good. And in fact, this might be... It's definitely up there with one of my favorite wooden coasters I've ever built. I still think Houston Comet takes the cake, or Timberfall at my Evergreen Gardens park. Those two are probably my favorites, but this one definitely by far my favorite GCI I've put together. The one at Joyland also looks really good, but this one has more of the Prowler vibe or the Mystic Timbers vibe, and I love the out and back, into the woods, low to the ground, and this one really fits the bill. But again, just kind of getting the foundations underneath the structure set up a little bit better. When I build wooden coasters, or really any coaster, I don't like to have the track touch the ground to the point where there's no support. And this one had a couple moments like that, and I think even outside of this video I had to go in and correct one. But for the most part, it's just digging the trench out, getting the land around it just so it looks a little bit nicer, taking out the grass, and I think maybe eventually I'll switch that dirt texture to the grass just to make it look like it's starting to get overgrown a little bit, because over time, these new coasters, the gravel and stuff, they tend to get overgrown unless it's taken care of. And for a ride like this, with the fact it goes out into the woods by itself like this, I really don't think it's anything we'd really be too concerned with getting overgrown unless it affected the ride. But anyway, after taking a break with the brake run, we head back over to make its trench look kind of nice and wide, and then we put the concrete texture on the side just to give it a little bit of a wall. I can't think of the term in my head, but there is a technical term for what that is, but I just can't think of it right now. But we're doing it over here on the side too. I think this part right here ended up being the nicest looking on this final turnaround heading towards the brake run. But all in all, this ride looks fantastic. And I ended up being really, really happy with it. And as of recording this, the ride is open, so we'll have that coming out soon. Then also have recorded the deconstruction video for The Last Stand, so that will be coming out shortly as well. So there's some content to look forward to in the future, but I'm just kind of rambling at this point. So one thing I forgot to do, and I'll come back and correct it later, but as I start putting the transfer track together here, and it was one of those things where you do it, and I'm sure if you've played this game, you've done it before too, where you put together this structure, and it's not like this one was anything complex or anything, but if you notice, I start to put the walls around it without the actual transfer track there. So we have the brake run, and we have one, like the actual main track that can slide, but we don't have the transfer piece to park the other train on. So that's something I will realize later on and get corrected. But I use the exact same style I did for War East at Joyland when it comes to the station for this ride. And after the inaugural year in 2007, we will switch the bright wooden texture to the more weathered and darker color. But for opening year, I want it to look like it's new. And if you've ever looked at videos of wooden coasters in their opening year, they look very, very bright in comparison just because the wood hasn't weathered yet. And for a ride in California that's going to be operating a heck of a lot because Funland is a year-round park, that might be something to consider. And it might even be something in the future I consider running these rides seasonally. So they won't get quite as high ridership, but, you know, especially with these wooden coasters, they do take a lot of upkeep. And I've done, in the simulation, I've done a little bit of that with Cyclone. I've closed it a little bit, like for a couple months at a time, and quote-unquote retract it by just adding kind of the secondary color scheme for that is just, you know, the normal darker structure with the brighter wood just to make it look like they've replaced sections of track. Because, you know, I'm a sucker for detail like that. So if you ever are trying to do a realism park, maybe a sim park like this, maybe try to do that a little bit, just retexture or repaint, I guess is the word I'm looking for, your sections of your ride to make it look like a retracking is being done. I can't recommend enough doing simulations like this. It makes it really satisfying just to have all this time go by and then to find these new coasters just popping up, because it really makes it feel like you're getting this new ride. It's like, oh, look at this over here. Because when you do like the scenarios or you just build a sandbox park and you just kind of put it all together at once, it all just kind of appears and it looks really cool, but you don't really get as attached, I think. And maybe some others are different, but I don't tend to get attached to the sandbox parks in the same way, especially now that I've done this and actually given these coasters time to run and build history. I mean, if you've seen the Million Riders post, I mean, we have 14, now 15 coasters. I have 2 more to upload, but we have a lot of Million Riders coasters to upload. And I looked at Cyclone recently, and that's given like 5 million rides to this point, which is really, really cool. And I'm really excited to see how many we get by the time we get to the end of this series, because it's just fascinating to see how this builds. And I think I touch upon this because I already recorded my next RCT construction or deconstruction video, I guess. I mentioned it in that video, but it's really, really cool to see how this works and just feel the history build itself up, because you start to notice, you know, like I said before, you notice when the new coasters go in, and you also notice when the older ones disappear, because amusement parks and theme parks tend to be very flexible with their attractions. You don't really get many that stick around forever. Like Kings Island has Racer, and that's been there for a long time. But think about the time Racer has been at Kings Island, right? You've had rides like Vortex go up, disappear. Rides like King Cobra go up, disappear. You've had rides like Firehawk show brief appearances. And then, you know, you get a ride like Orion that appears next to it. But Racer's been a consistent, but there's been a lot of rides around it as well that have risen and fallen in that time frame. And it just, you really start to build that historical aspect, which is really cool. Which is something with the Bumbly Beach Corp series I was going for, but because I just kind of threw those together and I didn't really give it time to develop in terms of history, it didn't feel that way. I wrote a really good story, I think, with that, but we also didn't get to see the park develop in much the same way. And I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent as we're going around here. Anyway, but as you can see, we have the same kind of War Saloon entrance. So the theme for this ride is the exact same as the one over at Joyland. I might try to make a few small tweaks here and there just so it feels a little bit different. But yeah, the theme for these 2 rides is very, very close to the same. One thing I'm still not the biggest fan of the way the overflow queue for this one worked out. We have 3 sets of overflow, But you go look at a ride like Iron Horse, which has that huge detailed queue house with, I think it has 5 overflows, but I've only ever used 3 for it. But when guests go in line for that, they go in and out, and you can kind of see it briefly there if you want to go back and pause. But there's this building in the queue that guests kind of maneuver in and out when some of the overflows are open. But with this one, it's just the tent, the canvas roofs. Feels very kind of late 2000s Cedar Fair, Six Flags, where there's not much detail gone into it. And I kind of wish I had added more detail, and I really don't want to at this point because I think we're set with what this ride is going to be. But as you can see, I went back and added the transfer track piece that I had forgotten to add. Really embarrassing, whoopsies. But we've got it in place now. Doing a little bit of texturing of the land around, and then we want to make sure this is a park with Funland that this one only has 2 trains. We probably had the option to buy a third, like Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens, and just rotate them, but War only has 2 trains, much like the one at Joyland only has 2, which is kind of off kilter for Funland. A lot of the rides here have 3 trains just to kind of keep them rolling, and you can rotate them. But here at Funland, each coaster has its own dedicated maintenance bay, so that when it's, in operation, you can pull a train off and have its own maintenance shop. Parts don't get mixed up and all that stuff. I've worked in a maintenance shop for an amusement park before, and things can get very chaotic if you don't stay on top of it. So I figured just for a quality of life improvement here at Funland, let's just build them their own maintenance shop. And then around that, we're putting in the restricted area fences just to make sure people don't go wandering in where we don't want them. And then just putting in the finishing touches here and then giving the test run. So this one ended up being, I believe, 80 feet tall. It's not quite as fast as the one at Joyland, but it does feature a longer track length of a little over 4,100 feet as compared to 4,009. So it's a little bit longer. However, the excitement rating on this one was a little bit lower, which we'll dive into in the POV video when it comes out on Friday. But very, very happy with the way this GCI turned out. I think it, by far, the best GCI I've ever built. And, in the future, the more I do, hopefully I can keep them up. But once I get to kind of where we are here, I really want to keep that standard up. But thank you for tuning in to this episode of RCT Construction. This was a really fun one to do. Building these GCIs is really fun. And I'll get the POV out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.